Some stories begin with fear, others begin with kindness. This one begins with a child who stopped in a quiet alley because she saw something hurt. It was just a bird, small, fragile, with a wing that couldn't lift it off the ground. She didn't think about where it came from. She didn't think about what might happen next. She just thought it needed help. During the day, the bird was calm, almost trusting. But every morning before sunrise, it tried to fly. Not once, not twice, again and again, as if it was trying to go somewhere it couldn't reach anymore. The girl thought it was scared. Then she thought it was sick. She never thought that noticing something so small could change so much. Because sometimes
Don't fly into the
moment
glass.
you choose to care is the moment you step into
Please
a
stop.
story
Let me help you.
you were never meant to see. Emily lived in a quiet neighborhood where nothing ever seemed to happen. The kind of place where mornings arrived gently, where lawns were trimmed on weekends, and where people waved without really knowing each other's names. The alley behind her house was narrow and mostly forgotten. It wasn't dangerous, just overlooked. A strip of cracked pavement where fallen leaves gathered and stray cats sometimes passed through. Emily often walked that way on her way home from school, cutting through instead of going around the block. That was where she found the bird. It was a pigeon, gray and dusted with white, crouched close to the wall as if trying to disappear into it. One wing hung lower than the other, bent at an angle that didn't look right. The bird didn't fly when Emily approached. It only shifted slightly, blinking, breathing fast. Emily knelt down without thinking. She didn't touch it at first. She just watched. The pigeon wasn't bleeding much. A few feathers were ruffled and stained, but there was no obvious wound. Still, the wing dragged against the ground when the bird tried to move. Emily had never taken care of an injured animal before, but she knew enough to know that leaving it there wasn't right. She went home, grabbed a small towel and an old shoebox, and came back. The pigeon didn't resist when she lifted it. It felt light in her hands, too light. She wrapped it gently and carried it back to the house, her heart beating faster than usual. Her mother helped her clean the wing as best they could. They didn't try to fix anything. They just made the bird comfortable. Water, a quiet corner, a lid left slightly open so it wouldn't feel trapped. For the rest of the day, the pigeon stayed calm. It didn't try to escape. It didn't make much noise. It ate a little, drank a little. If Emily hadn't known better, she might have thought it was already used to being handled. The bird watched her with dark, steady eyes, but there was no panic in them, no wild thrashing, just stillness. That night, Emily went to bed thinking she had done the right thing. The next morning, she woke before her alarm. At first, she thought the noise came from outside. A dull, fluttering sound, irregular but persistent. When she realized it was coming from the kitchen, she sat up immediately. The pigeon was inside the box, wings beating hard against the cardboard. Not randomly, not in fear. It was trying to fly. Emily rushed over and lifted the lid. The bird struggled harder, forcing itself upright, pushing with its legs, spreading its injured wing as if pain didn't matter. It tried again and again, each attempt ending the same way, off balance, collapsing back into the box. Emily froze. She had seen birds panic before. This didn't look like panic. She spoke softly, trying to calm it, then closed the lid again, giving it space. Slowly, the pigeon settled. Its breathing eased. The struggle stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Emily checked the clock. It was early, very early. The sun hadn't risen yet. She brushed the moment aside. Animals behaved strangely sometimes, especially when they were hurt. That was what she told herself. Later that day, the pigeon was calm again. It rested. It ate. It watched. Nothing seemed wrong. The second morning, it happened again. The sound woke Emily the same way, fluttering, urgent. When she reached the box, the pigeon was already struggling, wings beating, body lifting as far as it could before dropping back down. Emily noticed something new this time. The bird wasn't just flailing. It was facing the same direction. Every time it tried to rise, its body angled toward the small kitchen window, toward the outside, toward something Emily couldn't see. She checked the time, almost exactly the same as the day before. This time, when the pigeon finally stopped, Emily didn't feel relieved. She felt unsettled. During the day, the bird behaved as it always did. Quiet, still, almost gentle. If not for the mornings, she would have thought it was healing normally. That night, Emily left the kitchen light off. She lay in bed longer than usual, listening. The third morning came before she was ready. The fluttering began again, sharper now, more desperate. Emily didn't rush this time. She stood at the doorway and watched. The pigeon pushed itself upright with effort, spreading its wings wide, ignoring the way the injured one sagged uselessly. It jumped, failed, tried again. There was no confusion in its movements, only intention. When it finally collapsed, exhausted, Emily felt a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. 3 mornings, 3 times. Always early. Always the same. That afternoon, Emily sat with her mother at the kitchen table and tried to explain what she had been seeing. She didn't talk about danger. She didn't talk about fear. She said the bird might be sick, that maybe something was wrong beyond the wing. Her mother listened, nodded, and agreed. They decided to take the pigeon to a veterinary clinic the next morning. That night, the pigeon rested quietly again, as if nothing had happened. Emily placed the box near the door, so they wouldn't forget it in the morning. Before going to bed, she checked on the bird one last time. It was still, awake, watching. Emily closed the lid gently and turned off the light, unaware that something very small and very deliberate had already begun to move. The next morning came quietly. Emily woke before the alarm, not because of noise this time, but because she was already expecting it. The pigeon had struggled again before dawn, just like the mornings before. When it finally stopped, she didn't feel relief. Only a growing certainty that keeping the bird at home was no longer the right thing to do. Her mother agreed. They placed the pigeon back into the shoebox, lining it with a clean towel. The bird stayed still as they closed the lid, its breathing steady, its body warm but fragile. Emily carried the box carefully, holding it close as they stepped outside. The air was cool, the kind of early morning that felt unfinished. The street was mostly empty. No traffic, no voices. Just the distant sound of a city slowly waking up. The veterinary clinic was only a few blocks away, close enough to walk. Emily focused on the box in her hands as they moved down the sidewalk. She could feel the bird shift slightly inside, but there was no struggle, no panic. It was as calm as it had been every day after sunrise. They reached the corner where the alley met the main road. That was when they saw the police officer. He was walking at an unhurried pace, scanning the street the way someone did when they were trained to notice small changes. At his side was a German shepherd, tall and alert, moving with quiet confidence. The name on the dog's harness read, Rex. Emily slowed without realizing it. She had seen police dogs before, usually from a distance. Rex was different up close, bigger, more focused. His ears were upright, his posture relaxed but ready, like something coiled beneath the surface. As they drew nearer, Rex stopped. Not abruptly, not aggressively. He simply halted. The officer paused with him, allowing the leash to loosen slightly. Rex didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't pull forward or back. He turned his head and looked directly at Emily. Not at her face alone, but at the box in her hands. The moment stretched. Emily felt suddenly aware of how loud her breathing sounded in the quiet street. She adjusted her grip on the box instinctively, holding it tighter, unsure why she felt the need to. Rex took a step closer. Still no sound. His eyes moved from the box to Emily, then past her, scanning the space behind her and to the sides, as if measuring something invisible. His nose lifted slightly, testing the air. The officer said nothing. Then Rex did something unexpected. He turned away from Emily and stepped toward the crosswalk, positioning himself between her and the street. He waited there, looking back only once, until Emily and her mother followed. As they crossed, Rex stayed behind them, standing just far enough back to watch both directions. Cars passed slowly. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. Once they reached the other side, Rex moved again, returning to the officer's side. The leash tightened. The patrol resumed. No warning had been given. No explanation offered. Emily turned back once, but Rex was already walking away. His attention returned to the street ahead. The encounter lasted less than a minute, but it stayed with her. They continued toward the clinic. Emily's heart gradually slowed, though she couldn't have explained why it had been racing in the first place. Behind them, the alley remained quiet. Almost. From the shadows just inside its mouth, a figure had shifted. The shoe lingered there for a moment. Then, without sound or hesitation, it stepped back. The alley swallowed the figure again. By the time Emily and her mother reached the clinic door, the street behind them looked exactly the same as it always had. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and quiet routine. The receptionist greeted them with a nod. Emily placed the box gently on the counter, explaining that she had found the bird injured a few days earlier. The pigeon did not struggle when the lid was opened. It lay still as the veterinarian examined the wing, checking carefully, speaking softly. Emily watched every movement, every expression, trying to read meaning into small details. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarms, no sudden reactions. The vet explained that the injury was serious, complicated. The wing would need time, and even then, recovery was uncertain. The bird would have to stay. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. She stepped back as the pigeon was carried away, still calm, still silent. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. The street was busier now. The quiet from earlier had dissolved into normal sounds. Engines, footsteps, voices drifting from open windows. Emily walked home with her mother, her hands empty. She glanced once toward the alley as they passed it again. It looked harmless. Just a narrow space between buildings. Nothing moved. Still, she walked a little faster. Far away, Rex continued his patrol. His pace was steady, but his ears flicked back once, as if remembering something. The officer followed, without comment. Neither of them looked back. The city moved on, but somewhere within it, something had taken note. The patrol ended the way it usually did. Rex walked beside his handler back through the doors of the precinct, the sounds of the street fading behind them. The building smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and disinfectant. Phones rang in the distance. Keyboards clicked. Nothing felt urgent. Rex should have settled. He didn't. Instead of lying down near his handler's desk, Rex kept moving. Not restless in the way of excess energy, but deliberate. He circled the room once, then again, nose low, eyes alert. His steps were quiet, controlled, as if he were following a pattern only he could see. His handler noticed. At first, he didn't interrupt. Dogs had moods, instincts, moments that passed on their own. But Rex didn't stop. He moved past the desks, paused near the lockers, then returned to the center of the room. And then he sat. Slowly, Rex opened his mouth and dropped something onto the floor. A single, small feather. Gray, white-tipped, light enough to shift slightly as it landed. Rex stared at it. The room continued around them. A printer whirred. Someone laughed quietly near the break area. No one else noticed. Then Rex barked, just once, sharp, controlled, final. His handler froze. Years of working together had trained him not to ignore moments like this. Rex did not bark without reason. Not like that. Not inside the station. The handler stepped closer, crouching slightly. He looked at the feather, then at Rex's face. The dog held his gaze, unmoving, as if waiting for acknowledgement. The memory surfaced almost immediately. A girl, a box, a pigeon, the quiet street. The way Rex had stopped, the way he had watched without reacting. The handler straightened and signaled to one of the nearby officers. No urgency in his voice, no raised volume, just enough to draw attention. The feather was collected carefully. It didn't belong there. Within minutes, 2 officers leaned over a desk, examining it under brighter light. It was unmistakable. Pigeon, common enough on the streets, but not inside a secured precinct, and not carried here by accident. Someone asked where Rex might have picked it up. The handler didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The image of the shoebox returned again, uninvited. The officers exchanged looks. They didn't jump to conclusions. They didn't call it evidence. Not yet. But the possibility settled into the room quietly, changing its shape. The bird the girl carried might not be what it appeared to be. The decision to investigate was made without ceremony. A call was placed to the veterinary clinic. No sirens, no uniforms, just a request for information, phrased as routine follow-up. The clinic staff confirmed they had the pigeon, injured wing, brought in that morning by a young girl and her mother. The bird was stable for now, quiet, under observation. An officer asked a few more questions, about intake notes, about anything unusual. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Yes, the veterinarian said. There was something. The officer listened without interrupting. The bird had a small band around its leg. Not uncommon by itself, but it had been modified. Slightly heavier than normal. When examined more closely, it contained something that shouldn't have been there. Not medicine, not identification, information. The call ended. The room went quiet. No one spoke for a moment. This was no longer about an injured animal. The officers gathered what they needed and began working in parallel. No official case file. No shared database entries. Everything stayed contained, spoken in low voices, written down only where necessary. They confirmed what the veterinarian had found. A coded data fragment, compact, carefully concealed, designed to survive short flights, rough landings, and curious hands that didn't know what to look for. It wasn't the kind of thing a wild pigeon carried. It was the kind of thing someone had trained a pigeon to carry. The implications spread quickly but quietly. If this bird was part of a system, then it wasn't alone. If it had been grounded, then someone would notice. And if someone noticed, they would eventually come looking. The first instinct, for some, was to act immediately. To retrieve the bird, secure it, track the source. That instinct was set aside, because there was a child involved. Emily. Her name appeared on the clinic's intake form. Age, address. A quiet street near a narrow alley. Nothing remarkable. And that was exactly the problem. If the bird was connected to something larger, then Emily had already been seen, already been noticed. The officers understood what Rex had done on the street. He hadn't reacted because reacting would have drawn attention. He hadn't barked because barking would have changed the moment. He had moved the girl instead. Now it was their turn to do the same. No officers were sent to Emily's home. No visible patrols increased in her area. Nothing that would signal interest or concern. Instead, they watched from a distance. The clinic was informed to continue care as usual. No mention of findings. No mention of law enforcement involvement beyond routine procedure. Inside the precinct, Rex finally lay down. His breathing slowed. His eyes closed, but only halfway. The handler sat nearby, thinking. They would wait, because whoever had put that data on the bird believed in silence, in patience, in systems that worked best when no one noticed them. And because of that, the officers believed something else. Sooner or later, someone would come back for what they thought they had lost. And when they did, the priority would not be arrests. It would be the girl who had picked up a broken-winged bird without knowing what it carried. Outside, the city moved through another ordinary day. People went to work. Children went to school. Pigeons gathered on rooftops and power lines, unnoticed as ever. Somewhere among them, one bird rested in a clinic, alive, quiet, and no longer alone. And somewhere else, a decision had already been made. Not to rush, not to reveal, but to protect. Until the truth was ready to surface on its own. The veterinary clinic was quiet in the way places like that often were. Not silent, but controlled. The steady hum of fluorescent lights. The soft movement of staff passing through narrow hallways. The faint sounds of animals behind closed doors, each in their own private moment of waiting. Emily sat beside her mother in a small examination room, her feet not quite touching the floor. The shoebox was gone now. The pigeon had been taken away almost immediately after they arrived, carried through a swinging door that Emily wasn't allowed to follow past. She stared at that door. It stayed closed longer than she expected. When the veterinarian finally returned, his expression was careful, neutral in a way that didn't try to soften what came next. He explained that the injury to the bird's wing was more severe than it had appeared from the outside. There was internal damage, stress, complications that couldn't be seen without closer examination. The bird was alive, but barely. The words "critical condition" landed heavily in the room. The veterinarian didn't promise anything. He didn't predict recovery. He explained procedures, risks, time frames that might not matter at all. Emily listened without interrupting. She nodded when she was supposed to. She didn't cry right away. It wasn't until the veterinarian stepped out that the weight of it reached her. She pressed her face into her mother's side and cried quietly, her shoulders shaking. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough to release the fear she had been holding back since the first morning the pigeon tried to fly. When they left the clinic, Emily didn't look back. She believed, fully, that the bird she had found in the alley might not survive. Outside, The day had moved on. Traffic passed. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Someone walked a dog across the street, unaware of the small story unfolding just beyond the glass doors of the clinic. Across the road, inside a parked car that had been there longer than necessary, someone watched Emily leave. They didn't watch her face. They watched her hands. Empty. No box. No bird. The conclusion was immediate. The pigeon was no longer in her possession, and that changed everything. From their perspective, the situation had entered a dangerous phase. An injured carrier was unpredictable. A veterinary clinic meant records, staff, questions, potential exposure, risk. They waited. Not long. That same afternoon, a different pair of people entered the clinic. They didn't rush. They didn't draw attention. They dressed plainly, spoke politely, and kept their questions simple at first. Curious, concerned, almost casual. They asked about an injured pigeon, asked if it had been brought in recently, asked whether it was still alive. They asked questions that sounded reasonable, but lingered too long on details that didn't matter to ordinary people. They didn't know that the clinic had already been secured. The staff had been instructed earlier that day. Nothing alarming, nothing obvious, just a request to notify authorities if anyone inquired beyond normal interest. And someone had. The officers were already inside the building when the strangers arrived. Not in uniform, not visible. They watched from separate rooms, through reflections in glass and the subtle pauses in conversation. The moment the questions shifted, from concern to retrieval, the decision was made. The arrest happened without noise. No raised voices, no struggle, no sudden movements. Hands were guided behind backs, doors closed. Words were spoken calmly and quietly, as if the clinic itself needed to remain undisturbed. The people being detained didn't resist. They had already understood. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was how much had already been uncovered. By the time the sun began to lower, more pieces were moving into place. Phone calls made, names matched, patterns recognized. The pigeon was not an exception. It was part of a system that relied on being invisible. At the precinct, the confirmation came slowly but steadily. Connections formed between addresses, routes, timing. Not just one bird, but several. All moving through spaces people ignored. Rooftops, alleys, ledges, corners of the city no one thought to watch. The organization behind it had existed quietly for years, protected by the simplest assumption of all, that no one was paying attention. Back at the clinic, the pigeon remained alive. Barely, but alive. The veterinarians worked carefully, stabilizing the wing, monitoring its breathing, its heart rate. They didn't know the full story. They didn't need to. Their role was to preserve life. And they did. That night, Emily lay awake in bed, replaying the past few days in her mind. The alley, the shoebox, the mornings before sunrise, the way the bird had tried to fly even when it couldn't. She wondered if it was in pain. She wondered if she had waited too long. She didn't know that her decision to bring the bird to the clinic had already prevented something far worse. She didn't know that people she would never meet had already been stopped because of it. And she didn't know that, at that very moment, officers were ensuring that no one else would come looking for what they believed had been lost. In a quiet room at the precinct, Rex rested beside his handler once more. He slept this time. Deeply. The tension that had kept him alert for days had eased. Whatever signal he had sensed on the street had reached its conclusion, for now. Outside, the city continued its ordinary rhythm. Lights flickered on in apartment windows. Trains passed beneath streets. Pigeons gathered on ledges, unaware of how close one of their own had come to never flying again. A secret that had traveled silently through the air had finally been grounded, not by force, not by chance, but by a child who stopped to help a broken-winged bird, and by the quiet decision of others to listen when something small refused to stay silent. The truth did not come immediately. For several days after the arrests, life returned to its ordinary shape. School mornings, quiet dinners, evenings where nothing unusual happened. Emily assumed the story had ended the way difficult stories often did, with uncertainty and silence. She still thought about the pigeon. Sometimes when she passed the alley, she slowed without realizing it. She looked at the wall where she had first seen the bird crouched low, wing hanging at the wrong angle. The space was empty now, just cracked pavement and drifting leaves. She told herself that was how it was supposed to be. Then, one afternoon, a man came to the door. He was not in uniform, no badge on display, just an ordinary jacket, worn shoes, and the calm posture of someone who did not need to explain himself loudly. He spoke briefly with Emily's mother, then asked if Emily could come with them for a short visit. He didn't say much, only that there was something she should know. They drove, without urgency, no sirens, no marked car. The city passed by in familiar fragments, traffic lights, storefronts, intersections, Emily recognized but rarely paid attention to. They stopped at the veterinary clinic, the same one. Emily felt her chest tighten as they walked inside. The smell was the same, clean, sharp, familiar. For a moment, she wondered if they were there to confirm what she already believed. But this time, they didn't stop at the waiting area. They were led down a quiet hallway, past rooms where animals rested and recovered. The sounds were softer here, controlled, intentional. The veterinarian was waiting. He didn't speak right away. He simply stepped aside. And there, inside a small enclosure lined with clean towels, was the pigeon, alive. Emily stopped walking. The bird looked smaller than she remembered, thinner. One wing was wrapped carefully, supported so it could heal properly. Its chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. It lifted its head slightly when Emily approached. Not in alarm, not in fear, just recognition. Emily didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The air left her lungs all at once, as relief replaced something heavy she hadn't realized she was still carrying. The pigeon was weak, the veterinarian explained. Recovery would take time. But the worst had passed. The danger was over. Emily nodded, barely hearing the rest. She stood there longer than necessary, watching the bird breathe, watching the small movements that proved it was real, that it had survived. No one rushed her. Outside, the afternoon light had softened. The world felt different somehow, quieter, as if something unresolved had finally been allowed to settle. They didn't tell Emily everything. They didn't explain what the bird had carried, or how many others like it had been found, or how close certain moments had come to ending differently. There was no reason for her to know any of that. What mattered was simpler. The bird was alive, and soon it would be free. A few days later, they met again, this time not at the clinic. The location was open and quiet, away from traffic and buildings. A wide stretch of grass bordered by trees, still damp with early morning dew. The sky was pale, just beginning to wake. Emily stood beside a small group of people she now recognized but did not fully understand. A few officers, the veterinarian, and Rex. Rex sat calmly at his handler's side, posture relaxed but attentive. He had been quiet ever since the day the tension lifted, his movements returning to the steady rhythm of routine. The pigeon was brought out carefully. The wrapping was gone now. The wing, though not perfect, held its shape. Strong enough, ready. Emily held the bird in her hands. It was warmer than she expected. She could feel its heartbeat, fast, determined. A life that had refused to disappear quietly. No one gave instructions. No one counted down. Emily stepped forward on her own. She knelt slightly, then opened her hands. For a brief moment, the pigeon stayed where it was. Then it moved. Its wings spread, both of them. The injured one hesitated just a fraction of a second, then followed through. The bird lifted itself cleanly into the air, rising without struggle, without confusion. It circled once, gaining confidence. Then it flew higher. Emily tilted her head back, watching as the pigeon became smaller against the sky. The sound of its wings faded quickly, replaced by open air and distance. Rex remained still. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He watched until the bird was nothing more than a dot, then nothing at all. The moment passed without ceremony. People shifted. Someone cleared their throat. The morning continued. Emily stood quietly, hands empty again. But this time, it felt right. She never learned how close she had been to danger. She never knew who had been watching, or why the pigeon's attempts to fly had mattered so much. Those details stayed where they belonged, contained and resolved. What she knew was this. She had found something hurt and helped it. She had paid attention when something didn't make sense, and because of that, something small had been returned to the place it belonged. The officers left shortly after. The veterinarian followed. Rex walked beside his handler, his steps steady, his job finished. Emily stayed a moment longer, looking at the sky. It looked the same as it always had, but she knew better now. Some things moved through the world unnoticed, not because they were unimportant, but because no one thought to look closely enough. That morning, a pair of wings had been given back their purpose, and that was enough.